Hi, it's Megan. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to share with you 10 different things I always keep in my freezer that helps make getting food on the table for breakfast, lunches, dinners super easy, super fast, and very convenient. So I kind of have these things broken up into two different lists. I have things that are just store-bought, things that I just regularly buy at the store and always have on hand, as well as a few homemade things that I always have on hand in my freezers. As you know, I've been working on doing a pantry challenge to kind of work through my freezer and my pantries to make sure that I am using the things that I have stored. So if you're interested in seeing some of the things that I've bought during this challenge and some of the meals and things and that I have been working on, you can go back to my last few videos to get some more ideas and information on that. So to start off with things that I purchased from the store that I always have on hand, the first thing is I always have different kinds of raw meat. So I always keep some kind of ground beef on hand, and I always keep frozen chicken on hand as well. Those are kind of the main meats that we use are beef and chicken. Occasionally, if I find some kind of pork on sale, I'll have that on hand. We just don't cook with it like a ton. I also keep frozen like breakfast sausage or bacon. Lots of times I will keep those on hand as well as like smoked sausage or chicken sausages as well, and hot dogs, and sometimes like pre-formed burger patties, are all kinds of like raw meats that I keep on hand. That way I always have them there, and then pretty much whatever kind of meal I'm making for my family, I can just grab that meat, thaw it, and cook it and have it ready to go for dinners. Or if I'm making freezer meals or preparing meal prepping, I just have those things always on hand. Okay, the next thing I always have on hand in my freezer is cooked rotisserie chicken. This one I haven't finished pulling yet, but every time I buy a rotisserie chicken from Costco, pretty much every time I go, I buy one. I pull off the meat, I shred it up, and I save it just in 2-cup portions. And that way I have cooked chicken ready to go when I'm making soups, casseroles, freezer meals. It's super convenient to have that already cooked, and you really can't beat the price on paying $5 for quite a bit of meat that comes off. And then I also use the carcass to make something else that I always keep in my freezer, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. The next thing I always keep in my freezer that I buy from the store are convenience meals. So I always have some kind of chicken nuggets because those are just quick, easy lunch or dinner that my kids like, that my husband and I will eat too. I also usually keep frozen pizzas on hand. Those are kind of like our main convenience type of meals that we have. So lots of times we keep like frozen fries or tater tots on hand as well. And those are just nice. I buy them when they're on sale because they can be pretty expensive otherwise. But if they go on sale, I'll usually buy a few to last us for a month or two until the next sale cycle comes through. And those are just, again, nice to have on hand for quick lunches, quick dinners when we need them. Okay, the next thing I buy from the store that I always keep in my freezer are cheeses. I buy shredded cheese, and shredded cheese freezes really nicely. I buy it in all different sizes, all different flavors that we usually use in my family. The shredded cheese freezes super nicely. It thaws really easily and doesn't like change texture or get weird between the freezing and the thawing. I do also buy block cheese a lot as well, and if that's starting to go bad, I will shred it myself and then freeze it. Block cheese just doesn't, you can freeze it, it just doesn't freeze quite as well because when you thaw it, it gets all crumbly, so it's hard to like slice it. So if you buy block cheese and want to use it as slices, you can slice it up and then freeze it, and then it's usually fine. Or you can shred it and it's usually fine. Just if you have a big block of cheese, do something with it first before you freeze it. Otherwise, it will just be a crumbly mess. Okay, the next thing I always keep in my freezer is extra butter. I go through butter a lot. I do a lot of baking and cooking from home, so we go through quite a bit of butter. And in the door of my freezer here, I usually keep it full of boxes of butter whenever they go on sale. I have a section in my fridge that I keep full of butter. When it gets low, I move butter from my freezer up into my fridge. These freeze really well. I just move them right from the freezer into my fridge and they thaw just fine, and it helps them last a lot longer. So whenever butter goes on sale, I always buy it just to make sure that I have enough and always have that on hand. The next thing that has to do with baking that I always keep in my freezer is yeast. I buy a big block like this from Costco for only a few dollars. And as long as it is vacuum sealed and I stick it right in the freezer, it will last for pretty much forever. And then I do have one that's open that I just refill this little jar with. And then when I'm baking, I just pull this jar out, use the yeast. I never like bring it to room temperature. I always just use it frozen, and it's always been fine with me. And that is helpful for when I do lots of bread and bread product baking. And so the yeast is really good to have on hand for those. And then I don't have to deal with like the little packets. I just have it. I have as much as I need. And I know that because it's in the freezer, it will last for a really, really long time. Okay, and the last thing that I always keep in my freezer are just some frozen veggies and frozen fruits. My girls really, really love smoothies, so I always keep frozen fruit on hand. Sometimes I buy it from Costco. These are just leftover peaches that were a little bit too soft to can from last summer. So I just put them in food saver bags, and then when I open those up, we can use those in smoothies or for like peach cobbler or something. And then I always keep a couple bags of frozen veggies that we usually like to have as a side or use in meals. So I usually have corn and spinach. Sometimes I'll have like frozen peppers or onions just for convenience if those have gone on sale. And then I usually also keep a couple of different styles of frozen potatoes as well, whether that be fries, tater tots, hash browns, or like the southern hash browns, like the square ones, because I use those in lots of different casseroles and meals. So I always make sure that I have some of those on hand as well. Okay, and then when it comes to my homemade products, I always have homemade bread in the freezer. Sometimes it's store-bought, but most of the time it is homemade when I'm getting low, or when I go and open up my last loaf, pull that out of the freezer, then I will put on my list within the next couple of days to make a new batch of bread. The bread recipe that I use makes 5 loaves, and so I only have to make bread every maybe 6 to 8 weeks. And it's not super hard. It's fairly easy. I just have to have it on a day where I'm home all day so that I can watch the rising process, and lots of it is just like sitting and waiting time to make homemade bread, but it's super easy. I can link a video where I have shown you how I make my homemade bread before down in the description box if you're interested in seeing how I do that. Okay, the other thing that I always keep in my freezer, especially in the fall and winter months, is homemade chicken stock. So I guess I'm gonna show you this first. I use the carcass from my rotisserie chicken. I throw it in my crock pot and cover it with water, add some different veggies like carrots, celery, onions, and some spices like bay leaves, Italian seasoning, parsley, poultry seasoning, and some salt. And I just cook that on low for pretty much 24 hours. After it has cooked and extracted all of like the yumminess from the bones, then I strain it, pick off any other additional meat, and then I save the broth in my super cubes. So this one is a 1 cup. These are each 1 cup portions, and then I also have some that have 2 cup portions in them. And then I just freeze them in here. And then I either just pop them out of here when I'm ready to use them, or if I'm making like a ton of broth, after one batch is frozen, I'll pop them out, put them in a Ziploc bag, and then I will use my super cubes again to refreeze my next batch. And it's nice to always have them in 2 and 1 cup portions because I make a lot of soups, I make a lot of casseroles, and I make a lot of things that use chicken broth. And this is pretty much free because it's a chicken carcass that I've already pulled all the meat off of. I would have just thrown the carcass away anyways. And then for my seasonings, I've already purchased the seasonings. For my veggies, I save the scraps of my veggies, so like any carrot peelings, the ends of my celery that aren't good, like to eat, onion peels or onions that are going bad. I'll save those and just put them in a bag in my freezer for whenever I am ready to make broth, and then I'll just dump it all in my crock pot and let it go. So that's awesome because it's super nourishing for your body. It tastes so much better than any store-bought broth. And like I said, it's basically free because you're already going to throw away the carcass, you're already going to throw away the veggie peelings, and you already have water. So the last thing that I always keep in my freezer is I keep a few different kinds of freezer meals. These are either recipes that I have doubled and frozen half of them, or I know that my family's only going to eat half of the meal before we get tired of it, so I just prepare the other half as a freezer meal. Or if we have a lot of leftovers of some kind, maybe even just enough for one meal, I will also put those in some kind of freezer bag and freeze them so that we have our own homemade convenience meals at other times. So just last week I made tater tot casserole. I know my family likes it, but it's hard for us to get through a whole casserole before we get sick of it. So I just made a single recipe. I made half of it for us to have that night and to have leftovers for lunch the next day. And then I just took the other half, froze it in one of these foil pans. I labeled what it was and some of the directions for how to cook it, and I just stuck this in the freezer. So now we have a dinner for another night whenever we need it or want it. Same thing with chicken pot pie. The chicken pot pie recipe that I use makes enough for 2 pies, but that's too much for my family to have at once. So I will just divide the filling mixture in half, cook half of it for dinner that one night, put the rest of the filling in a freezer bag, freeze it nice and flat so that it thaws really easily. It doesn't take up a lot of room. And then we have the filling all ready to go for another chicken pot pie. And then I always keep some store-bought pie crusts in the freezer so that I can always make chicken pot pie because it's a family favorite and is super easy. This is also something that I use my pulled rotisserie chicken for, is to make this recipe as well. So those are 10 things that I always keep in my freezer that helps make my cooking life so much easier. What are some things that you always have in your freezer? Are there any things that I didn't mention that you always like to have that are super helpful for you? Let me know down in the comments below. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.